Hello and welcome to episode number 37 of Chel Squared. I'm your host, Andrew Chelney, and as per usual, we've got a ton to talk about today. Before we get into it here, please make sure to follow the podcast on Twitter at Chel Squared and on Facebook at Chel Squared for more hot takes, news about future guests, poll questions, and a whole lot more. Please rate the show if you enjoy listening. It means more to me than I can put into words. And every time you either like the show on SoundCloud, give it a rating on iTunes, follow it on Spotify, etc., a puppy gets a hug from its owner. I don't make the rules here, just making sure you are in the know. If you prefer listening to podcasts on YouTube, search Chel Squared Podcast, and the show is there too. The trade deadline was this Monday, and it did not disappoint. A lot of trades went down, which means there's a lot to discuss here. No shortage of hashtag content. First, to kick off the craziness, of course, was Matt Duchene being shipped to Columbus with defenseman Julius Bergman for 20-year-old winger Vitaly Abramov, 21-year-old winger Jonathan Davidson, a first-round pick this season and a conditional first-round pick next season. Big money moves by the Columbus Blue Jackets. Bergman would later go to the Rangers along with a 4th and a 7th round pick this year for Adam McQuaid. Columbus wasn't done trading with Ottawa, though. The next day, they traded Anthony Duclair, a 2020 second round pick, and a 2021 second round pick in exchange for Ryan Dzingel. I mean, Columbus is going all in. Panarin's still there. Bobrovsky's still there. GM Jarmo Kekalainen is putting all his chips in a deep run this year, and honestly, I'm all for it. The Jackets have never been past the first round of the playoffs. Their biggest names are more than likely leaving in July. Instead of trading them, GM Jarmo, he's using them as his own rentals like Carolina's doing with Michael Furland. And the same day, the Dallas Stars got Rangers fan favorite Matt Zuccarello in exchange for a conditional 2019 second-round pick and a conditional 2020 third-round pick. These picks can both become first-round picks if Dallas either wins 2 rounds in these playoffs this season or if Matt Zuccarello re-signs in Dallas. Of course, Zuccarello scored a goal and added an assist in his debut with the Stars and then broke his arm blocking a shot in the second period. So not great luck for Zuccarello and the Dallas Stars. He'll be out a month. Dallas GM Jim Nill didn't make any short-term moves after that happened, for better or for worse. We'll get into that later on in the show. And of course, the day before the deadline, the Sabres became sort of buyers by trading 21-year-old defenseman prospect Brandon Gould and one of their first-round picks this year to the Anaheim Ducks for 24-year-old Brandon Montour to bolster that blue line, which hasn't been all that great this season. And the same day, kind of around midnight, sort of to kick off trade deadline day, the Sharks nabbed Gustav Nyquist from the Red Wings for a 2019 second-round pick and a conditional 2020 third-round pick to add some more power to their offense. And then, before the deadline, the dominoes started falling, and it became super hectic. Kevin Hayes, of course, of the Jets for Brendan Lemieux, a first-round pick this season, and a 4th-round pick in 2022. Then the Avs got Brassard and a 6th-round pick from the Panthers for a 2020 third-round pick. I mean, boy, the Brassard for Zibanejad trade a couple years ago just keeps looking better, and better for the New York Rangers. And also, the Predators made some moves. They got Mikael Granlund from the Minnesota Wild in exchange for Kevin Fiala. GM Fenton has made some pretty head-scratching moves in Minnesota recently. And the Predators, of course, also got Wayne Simmons from the Philadelphia Flyers. Are we done here? No, we're absolutely not done here. Ottawa has shipped Mark Stone and Tobias Lindbergh to Vegas for elite defensive prospect Eric Brandstrom, Oscar Lindbergh, and Dallas's 2020 second-round pick. Now that is a huge trade, and we'll talk about that later on in the show, of course. Eric Brandstrom is touted as the next Erik Karlsson. So now the Ottawa Senators have, I guess, their Erik Karlsson again. The Vancouver Canucks also somehow managed to get better by addition by subtraction here. They managed to trade away Erik Branson, statistically one of the worst defensemen in the entire league. he got traded to the injury-ridden Pittsburgh Penguins for Tanner Pearson. I mean, Jim Rutherford heard all the fans trashing his decision to sign Jack Johnson to a big contract, so in retaliation what he did was he brought another terrible anchor to his blue line. Truly incredible stuff. And finally, the last big trade here that I'm going to mention is the Bruins acquiring Mojo Marcus Johansson from the Devils for a 2019 second-round pick and a 2020 fourth-round pick. Woo! That was a mouthful. There was a lot of trades to get through. Here with me to talk about all the trades I just listed off, how the Bruins fared at the deadline with Coyle and now Mojo, the poll question, and a whole lot more. Joining me is Stanley Cup of Chowder writer Jake Reiser. Jake, what's up?
Nothing much, Andrew. Glad to be on after what was a really whirlwind weekend before the deadline.
Yeah, there's no shortage of Twitter refreshing going on by hockey fans. But before we get into the super nitty-gritty here, I want to give a quick shout-out to one of the all-time greats and, of course, friend of the program, Colin Beswick, for connecting the two of us for today's show. Question for you, Jake. I don't know too much about you, so this will be both an easy question and a question that will tell me a lot about you, a classic. Pineapple on pizza, yay or nay?
I'm nay on pineapple for pizza.
Good, thank you. Good. I'm glad. I'm very glad. And see, now we can move forward, because if you were yay on pizza, the whole episode would have been us arguing about it. So I'm very glad you are nay on pizza. Again, I don't know too much about you because Colin connected us late yesterday, but I'm very glad we are on the same page here in terms of pizza toppings. So let's talk trade deadline here, just combined talk and trade. Let's talk trade deadline. No shortage of moves over the past week. Before diving in deep here, who are your biggest winners and losers of the 2019 NHL trade deadline?
Well, you talk so much about the Columbus Blue Jackets, and they clearly are a huge winner at the deadline. Jarmo Kekalainen really putting all his eggs in one basket. We'll see whether it pays off come playoff time, where the Blue Jackets seed, if they can make that final push and get there in the first place. But to get Duchesne, to get Dzingel, while keeping Panarin and Bobrovsky, at least for this part of the run, I think is really impressive and shows just how much Kekalainen believes in this core. Winnipeg, I think, is also another big winner with just how active they were. GM of the Winnipeg Jets, Kevin Cheveldayoff. I believe it was Elliot Friedman who made a funny joke during trade deadline special that Cheveldayoff, they really emphasized the day off in his last name for what his former thesis at the trade deadline used to be. The Winnipeg Jets used to be so inactive. But to get Kevin Hayes, Nathan Beaulieu, Boden Kislevich, Alex Broadhurst, and just the bevy of moves they were able to do, it reminds me very much of the 1994 New York Rangers, where they knew they were good, but they could do so much more, and they revamped a lot of their team to try and figure it out, and we're hoping that chemistry came back in line. I think if the Winnipeg Jets can find that chemistry with these new acquisitions, it'll come in really handy and give them such a big push going into the hopefully the later stages of the playoffs for them. Loser, Pittsburgh. I mean, come on. I thought they could have stayed pat and just done fine and stayed as a middling-ish type of team for the rest of the season, have a top 10 draft pick, go in the lottery, and they'd be happy. Eric Goodbranson. That's terrible. A move almost like they want to tank for Jack Hughes at that point. To have a line of Eric Goodbranson and Jack Johnson is going to be really funny to watch for the rest of the league. Wow, I would consider them a pretty big loser. I don't know. Detroit, I feel really bad that they lost Gus Nyquist. The New Jersey Devils, I would also say, as a loser, but I think they understood their position a lot better, and they're playing probably 3/4 of an AHL team at this point. So I would say those guys would probably be my biggest losers, if not Pittsburgh, for that glaringly bad move.
I would say one of the biggest losers has to be the Islanders, right? Because this team is very much overachieving and is a good team, as we've seen for the majority of the year, but a lot of fans were hoping that the Islanders would add some offense. They would add more to the team, that they would add one of these bigger names to the table, and now we have a potential contending or at least a solid playoff team, but they stood pat. They didn't do anything, and that kind of prompted a lot of Islanders fans, at least that I've seen on social media, are not happy with Lamoriello at all because he didn't do anything to bolster that team. Now, of course, they are first in the Metro right now, tied with the Washington Capitals, but the Islanders do have 2 games in hand. So you can make the argument that they didn't need to do anything, but at the same time, the only team that didn't do anything was Tampa Bay Lightning, and they've won 10 in a row. They are sitting very comfortably, if I might add, at the top of the entire league. I mean, they have 102 points right now. The closest team is the Flames with 89, and they've won 7 in a row. I mean, the Lightning, I feel like, are winners only because they didn't need to do anything, and they didn't. They didn't tinker with the chemistry. They didn't tinker with their lineups, and I feel like that was the best option for Tampa Bay. They're already far and away the best team in the league. There's no reason to mess with any of that going on, and I feel like by not doing anything, they did the right thing. Another big loser, I thought, besides obviously Pittsburgh that you talked about, I mean, adding Eric Goodbranson is one of the fattest minuses that I can think of ever, and this is why I'm putting the Canucks as a winner. They didn't do anything. They didn't really do much in this trade deadline, but addition by subtraction. They got rid of one of the worst defensemen in the entire National Hockey League. They won only solely because of that move. Solely due to that move. They also traded away Jonathan Dahlen, who they got from the Senators. They kind of gave up on him. They kind of gave up on him a little bit too quickly, I thought. But that's beside the point here. They got rid of one of the worst defensemen in the entire league. I feel like one of the under the radar winners here has to be the Ottawa Senators because of what they did with the hand they were dealt. They traded Matt Duchene and got a haul. They got Ryan Dzingel and got a haul. They traded Mark Stone and got a haul and a half for him. I mean, Eric Brandstrom, as far as I know, I'm not a prospect expert by any stretch of the imagination, but from what I understand from people that do follow prospects, Eric Brandstrom is supposed to be one of the best up-and-coming defensemen that we've seen in a long time. Not just one of the best up-and-coming defenseman now or in his class, but supposedly he's supposed to be an elite defenseman. So the Ottawa Senators did well in getting him. Now, Mark Stone is one of the best wingers in the game, and of course, the Vegas Golden Knights did well by giving him a multi-year extension with a $9.5 million AAV, if I'm not mistaken. But at the same time, the Senators did well with the hand they were dealt. I mean, the fans probably aren't happy with trading, their best players. But if you have to deal them, the return for all 3 players, I thought was really good. The teams that I put down as unsure, one of them is the Blue Jackets, only because it very much hinges on how far they make it in the playoffs this season. Because if they miss the first round, I would assume that they're going to make the playoffs, but they might not. I mean, right now they're 1 point away, and they lost their last game against the Penguins, who are 1 point ahead of them in the standings. Pittsburgh has their second and final wild card spot. Columbus is 1 point behind them. They lost that game. Columbus, I would assume, is going to make the playoffs, right? But right now, it's no one is for sure making it. If you're looking at Montreal, who has 75 points, you have Pittsburgh at 74, and Columbus at 73. And then you have Carolina at 74, who is third in the Metro Division. You have these teams that Columbus, it really, really, really super hinges on how they do in the playoffs if they make it. If they at least win a round, I would consider them a winner, right? Only because, hey, they finally broke through this wall. They can show that they've make it past the first round of the playoffs. And also, this was a big statement for a semi-small market team, right? They can also acquire these big names, and they can also make a big push. Those are some positives. But again, if they make it to the playoffs, and if they drop out in the first round, or even worse, if they don't make it, then they'll be huge losers because they traded a bunch of assets, and they still didn't make the playoffs. And then Panarin's going to be gone, and so is Bobrovsky. So they're taking a huge gamble on them being successful in the playoffs, which is why I put them down as unsure, only because, hey, a lot of this hinges on what they do past April. And also, another team that I put there is the Boston Bruins, because you added Charlie Coyle, you added Mojo to the team, but it feels to me like the Bruins were linked to better players. Charlie Coyle is a good player, Mojo a good player, but it seemed to me throughout the rumors and speculation on social media that the Bruins were linked to or either had interest in a Stone or insert name here that could have been a game changer for this team. And yet they didn't get that game changer. They got very good pieces, but did they get the game changer that they were potentially looking for? I would say no. So my question to you is, how do you think the Boston Bruins fared in this deadline? Because like I just said, they didn't get the Stone, they didn't get the Duchesne, they didn't get the billboard player, but they did add some good second line, third line players to the mix that will aid their scoring drought that some of the third and the fourth lines have had in this season. So what grade the Boston Bruins here at the deadline? How do you think they did?
If I had to give them a letter grade,
yeah,
I would say B+, A-, which I think is optimistic. And here are a few reasons why the trade deadline happened the way it happened for the Bruins. Last year when they traded for Rick Nash, they gave up their first round pick to the New York Rangers. Rick Nash started out really good and then injured himself and then up and retired. Could we have predicted that he would have injured himself and been out for so long and retired due to that fact? No, there's really nothing we could have done in hindsight to kind of predict that. Did it hurt a lot that you got not a ton of value after giving up your first round pick? Absolutely. So one of Don Sweeney's biggest factors in this trade deadline is that he really didn't want to give up that first round pick in the 2019 draft. And he didn't. So kudos to him for that, for sticking to his guns on that. That immediately takes him out of some of the races of Mark Stone, Artemi Panarin, guys that would need a haul and a half, like you said, the biggest Golden Knights gave up for Stone, to get either of those guys. And it just wasn't going to work. It would have made them really good, but it was so far out of the price range that Don Sweeney was looking for. That puts them back in the price range of Charlie Coyle, Marcus Johansson, Wayne Simmons, players that command second-round picks, fourth-round picks, things that can happen in the future, small-level prospects, but nothing that will tremendously affect your draft standing or your current roster. And that's the biggest win for the Bruins, is that they added without taking away. They didn't have to give up any roster players. Is it hard losing Ryan Donato, a guy who has a really high ceiling ostensibly? Sure. But he's not helping right now. 9 points on the season for the Bruins in his time there. He has 5 points in 5 games with the Minnesota Wild. Good for him. But it's a completely different system, and it just wasn't working in Boston. You replace him with a guy who has much more NHL experience, a guy who's a bigger body, can adapt well into the Bruins system, and clearly it seems like he has. Marcus Johansson, a guy who's a little older, but a guy who still has a good scoring touch. Vision that was described by Jake DeBrusk as David Krejci-like, which is a huge compliment for Johansson. So you let those guys take commanding roles, and you give prospects who maybe weren't performing the way you wanted to, or guys who had too many minutes, a night off or less minutes. Sean Corrali, Noel Acciari, Danton Heinen. You can take some of the pressure off those guys now that you have more definitive NHL roster players and not fringe guys or prospects who are still learning on the fly and eating minutes at the same time. All in all, they didn't make a big splash, but I don't think they needed to. So I'd give it a good win for Don Sweeney and his crew.
Well, let's say the Boston Bruins, whoever they play in the first round of the playoffs, let's say they win. And then I would assume that the Lightning are going to win the first round of the playoffs as well because of just how dominant they are. Let's say the Bruins and the Lightning meet in round 2 of the playoffs. How confident are you that these moves have elevated the Bruins to at least push the series to 5, 6, 7 games here. How confident are you that maybe, potentially, as we've seen in a lot in recent years, and just in hockey in general, because a lot of this relies on luck. How confident are you that the Bruins can either push or potentially even win the series against the Lightning? Because like you said, Coyle is very good, Mojo very good, but they did not splurge on a big-time performer. So how confident are you then of the Bruins potentially battling the Lightning in round 2 of the playoffs, that they would either push or win the series?
I like how you frame that. Potentially push or win the series, and not just outright sweep and completely obliterate the Lightning. Because I think these moves, applied to the framework that you're putting into this question, they help the Bruins push this series, if not beat them. The series last year between Boston and Tampa, 4-1, I don't think is indicative of how the series was played. It was tough-nosed. It was hard fought. Gritty is the right word, but not in an old Rock'em Sock'em type of NHL way.
And not like the mascot, right?
Yeah. All of a sudden, Gritty shoots out from nowhere and knocks down Steven Stamkos and Brad Marchand while he's trying to lick someone. It was gritty in the sense that there were hits of flying. It was tough to move the puck. It was tough to find open space because there was a big body there to basically immobilize you. And the Bruins of last year were built like the Bruins of this year, or of earlier in this year, where they had so many prospects and guys whose legs were just so dog tired. And it made it really difficult for the Bruins to find any mojo past game 1 of that series. Now that they have mojo, and they have mojo Marcus Johansson, I think that they're giving themselves a better shot with guys who have seasoned NHL legs, guys who have each made the playoffs before. Mojo with the Capitals, Charlie Coyle with the Wild, albeit neither of them really having extreme success in the playoffs. They at least have that experience to build off of. So I think it gives them a much better shot as a whole of hopefully pushing, if not beating, the Lightning in a second round matchup.
What do you think about the Columbus Blue Jackets holding on to Panarin and Bobrovsky? Now, I mean, again, nothing is for sure, right? So we don't know exactly what's going to happen come July 1st. But the thought process is that Panarin's gone, Bobrovsky's gone. Now, they traded for Keith Kincaid for some low pick 5 years down the road. I think it was a 2022 fifth-round pick or something like that, something along those lines, which clearly doesn't replace Bobrovsky come July 1st, and also Columbus will roll with 3 goaltenders. We'll see how that plays out. But Columbus is keeping those 2 guys as their own rentals, like Carolina is with Michael Furland. What do you think about Columbus's moves? I mean, like we mentioned earlier, they made some huge splashes and made a statement to the rest of the league saying, hey, we're not taking this on the chin. We are going at it full steam ahead. We're not going to trade Panarin or Bobrovsky, and we're not going to whimper to the 9th spot in the East or whatever it is, and then get to that in-between draft range where it's not a top 10 pick, but you're also not good enough to make the playoffs or at least go far in the playoffs. So it's gonna be that middle of the pack pick anyway. So give me your analysis on the Blue Jackets moves and the statement that Columbus is making to the state of Ohio and to the rest of the NHL that, hey, we're going to do this and we're going to do this our way.
If you look at that top 6 now, it's really scary. Artemi Panarin, Pierre-Luc Dubois, Cam Atkinson, Ryan Dzingel, Matt Duchene, Oliver Bjorkstrand. That is really formidable. And it says a statement that we are here to play for the Stanley Cup this year. But it also says we're not sure we can re-sign everybody to a reasonable contract and be good at the same time. They might be able to re-sign Bobrovsky. I'm not sure. Panarin, I think, is going to be gone. Duchene, that intrigues me. Everybody needs to remember that Matt Duchene is also a free agent at the end of this season. And I think that he's the most likely to end up staying in Columbus for the right price. And that's also another good bit of framework to build off of for them. it's definitely a statement for them to have all three of them on the same team right now. They're going to go for it, and come heck or high water, they're ready to play every single night and hope that this chemistry forms soon, if not now. But it also says we're going to take advantage of the fact that we can pay these guys this year, and then we don't know what we're going to do from here.
And what about a team like the Calgary Flames, who, again, were linked to all sorts of names? Mark Stone was supposedly going to Calgary. I think Mike Commodore tweeted that out or something along those lines. But the Flames didn't really do much to their core roster. They added Oscar Fantenberg from the LA Kings for a 2020 fourth-round pick. But other than that, they really didn't do anything to, again, tinker with their lineup, which, for better or for worse, they are the second best team in the entire league right now, so that could be the right thing to do. But some fans are not all that pleased. Again, the Flames have won 7 in a row. They are comfortably sitting 7 points ahead of the San Jose Sharks in the Pacific Division. Right now, everything is going well for them. What do you think about Calgary's decision to pretty much stand pat at the trade deadline?
I think they're just happy that things are gelling at the right time. Gaudreau, Monahan, Lindholm as a top line is really good. Tkachuk, Backlund, Bennett is also a really decent second line. Their defense is ostensibly stacked in the top four: Giordano, Brody, Hannafin, and Hamonic. Fantenberg certainly provides some good relief for Oliver Shillington, who should hopefully get a little bit of relief because he's been starting a lot of the year and has gotten some NHL experience, which is good for his capital. But I think that they're happy that they're gelling the way they want to, and that they've finally found some goaltending in the interim that's working for them in David Riddick. I don't think that they wanted to touch anything unless it was going to dramatically improve them. And I don't think there were a lot of moves, aside from the big names, that were going to dramatically improve this team. So I give them credit for standing pat and not blowing everything up.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with what you're saying here, because Calgary, again, I feel like that their biggest hole, I talked to Ryan last week on the show, Calgary's one of their biggest issues is the goaltending, right? Mike Smith hasn't been playing well at all, and David Riddick has been playing well as of... There's been some spots where he hasn't been playing super well, but for the most part, he's holding down the fort pretty well. If you look at a team like the Islanders, right, and I really want to touch upon this, that the New York Islanders, who are playing Toronto, right, this is a big deal tonight, going down. Tavares coming back to New York for the first time. They're playing in the Coliseum, so that's going to be added drama to that. There's going to be a big hoopla in Long Island. That's going to be a must-watch game. But the Islanders didn't do anything at the deadline. They did nothing at all, which there's some hostility, like I said earlier, regarding that decision. And I'm calling them a loser in the trade deadline because of the fact that they needed to bolster their offense and they didn't get it. If you look at the Eastern Conference right now, the teams that are in the playoffs, the Islanders have far and away scored the least amount of goals out of any team that's currently in a playoff spot in the Eastern Conference. They've also given up less goals than anybody in the Eastern Conference. So that's a plus, I guess. But right, you take a look at their offense, and the only team that they have beat in the entire East is the Detroit Red Wings, who have scored one less goal. Right, the offense in Brooklyn/New York isn't as high as perhaps the Islanders fans want it to be, and you couple that with they only scored one goal in the game against the Flames. They're playing Toronto tonight, which is going to be, again, a must watch game. It's going to be really exciting to watch. But what do you think about Lou's decision to just not do anything at the deadline and just kind of leave the team as is?
I think it's very Lou.
Sure.
Would Matt Duchene have really helped them propel themselves beyond hopefully making the playoffs and getting past the first round? Yeah, that would have been instant offense with, Josh Bailey, Matt Barzal, Matt Duchene. That would have been an instantly unstoppable line. But with Lou, it's always a process. and he's always mum about what that is or what that means. And for the Islanders, I guess it means not breaking the bank and not going out and losing your assets right now for one that's also going to happen to leave at the end of next season. Their big key free agents aren't necessarily key free agents next year. Valtteri Filppula, Anders Lee is a big re-sign. Brock Nelson, Jordan Eberle, those are the big guys, and they can re-sign them for not as much money as they necessarily seem. Eberle you could re-sign for less. Lee is going to command more. Nelson is going to command. Right now he's on $4.25. He could probably command that same amount. But you need to leave yourself that room to make bigger moves. The key, you need to re-sign Matt Barzal or extend Matt Barzal, and then you can build around that. They've got goaltending for the future in Robin Lehner. I think he's rebuilt his value, but he's a free agent again at the end of next season too. So you've got to figure out what to do. I don't think that breaking the bank and losing assets that are going to be valuable to you in the next few years was worth getting one right now, especially with the success the team has had.
Lou definitely is not the most active GM at the trade deadline. We've seen that in recent history. We've seen that on Monday. He's not one for making too many trades. One team that didn't make any sort of trades after the Matt Zuccarello acquisition was the Dallas Stars, who are now sitting outside of the playoff picture. I believe I read this on Twitter last night. It was either after Christmas or after the New Year's. This is the first time they're out of the playoffs since that point. So they've been doing pretty well, but they did lose their last game against the Golden Knights 4-1, and now they play the Kings tonight. After acquiring Matt Zuccarello, who played very well for them in the period and a half or so of being a Dallas Star, he's now out for about a month. And Jim Nill didn't do anything to kind of patch up that hole, which could be seen as a good thing, right? Because at the end of the day, if Matt Zuccarello is going to be healthy before the playoffs, then there's no problem. Then there's no really worry, right? Because he'll be back once the actual playoffs begin. But the question now remains is that they did give up a couple of picks to get him, and now the offense that they got from him is now removed because he's not in the lineup. How do you think Dallas did? Do you think they should have done better? Do you think they should have made that extra move to acquire maybe another forward or maybe a defenseman or something along those lines? What do you think about the Dallas Stars moves over the past week or so?
I definitely think the Dallas Stars should have made a contingency move. The West, it's really the wild, wild West. I give 5 points as my general range of worry in the standings. Within 5 points of Dallas are Arizona, Chicago, Vancouver, and that's it. Those are three teams who are up and coming. Arizona is 7-3-0 in their last 10. Chicago is 6-4-0 in their last 10. Two teams on the rise who can compete directly with Dallas for that playoff spot. I think that's really, really tough. And I think that Arizona, it's going to be a good surprise for them if they make the playoffs. Same for Chicago. I think Dallas had higher expectations on them. And if they let Arizona or Chicago catch up to them and take the standing points ahead of them, get into that second or even that first wild card spot and make the playoffs over the Stars, it's a huge disappointment for Dallas. So I think as reactionary as it might have been, they needed to have a second move in their back pocket with that Zuccarello injury.
Dallas, of course, 3-6-1 in their last 10 games. Only scored 158 goals all season, and I was just talking about the Islanders' lack of offense. I mean, they scored 179 goals so far this season, which is, again, the second worst in the Eastern Conference, but the Dallas Stars have only scored 158. And they're also not good away from their home. They're 19-10-2 at home, but once they leave that arena, they're 12-17-3. They've spiraled in their last 10 games here. Dallas really needed another move, and I totally agree with you in this, that Zuccarello being out is tough, and they should have done something, at least very short term, to help this team out, because clearly, I mean, right now they're out of the playoff picture, And as I said, they haven't been out in a while, but the fact remains is that Colorado has seemingly found its legs after spiraling for about a month. They've crawled back in. They now have the second wild card spot at 68 points, tied with Minnesota, who has also won 4 in a row, but after making some not great moves. As I said in the opening, they traded Mikael Granlund for Kevin Fiala. Mikael Granlund, I feel like personally, is the better player, but Fiala is also younger, so maybe that had something to do with that move. To me, that's a head scratcher. But
money also has to do with that move too. That Michael Granlund's cap hit is about $4 million higher than Kevin Fiala.
It's true.
But if there's a team that I think people should keep their eye on in the Western Conference, it's Chicago. You talked about the lack of goal scoring that Dallas has had. Dallas has scored 158 goals this season. Chicago has scored 215, and yet they're still 2 standing slots lower than Dallas because they've given up 239 with goalies Cam Ward and Colin Delia. Now that Corey Crawford is back, how many goals is he going to steal back in this last month and a half of the season and maybe give Chicago that edge to sneak up into that second wildcard spot?
That's a great point. I was gonna touch upon this a little later, but yeah, you are exactly right. And also, I'm not sure if you watched the Blackhawks Ducks game last night, but Corey Crawford played well, and they were talking about it before the start of the game that Corey Crawford has been cleared for a while, but Chicago wanted to make sure they wanted to take their time and making sure 110% that Corey Crawford was good to go, and he finally was after missing over 2 months of playing time to step in against Anaheim, a team that is, I mean, we've seen this pretty much all season that they've just completely spiraled out of control, and I feel like the Ducks probably should have sold more than they did. I mean, they did trade Brendan Montour. I don't know if that's the player that you want to trade away. 24 years old, they did get a first-round pick for him, which is a nice haul. But it's not going to be a top 10 pick. It's either going to be San Jose's pick or St. Louis's pick. The Sabres did not trade their own first round pick. So to me, Anaheim, I mean, I don't know obviously we're not general managers here, so we don't know what the value was for guys like Corey Perry or Ryan Getzlaf or whatever, or, insert name or insert big names here. But I do feel like they probably should have at least done one more move to sell. I mean, they did do better than the Edmonton Oilers, a team that should have sold everything, besides Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. Don't touch them forever. But they did nothing. They have a bunch of players that should have been traded for assets. And what do? They did nothing. That's
very Edmonton, though. I mean, it's the status quo for an organization that seems to just keep on failing and keep on failing and keep on failing ad nauseum. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I think that's clearly what we're seeing in Edmonton. To address your concerns as far as Anaheim goes, I can understand why they didn't necessarily sell too much. Who are you gonna move? Adam Henrique, the guy you just traded for a year and a half ago, and still has almost $6 million as a cap hit going through the 2023-24 season. It's virtually an immovable contract.
He's also been one of their best players, so I don't even think they should have moved him, even if they wanted to.
Jacob Silfverberg, who they just re-signed, but still was going to command so much more on the free agent market anyway. He was only going to be a rental for somewhere. Otherwise, it's a bunch of prospects and more movable contracts. Cough, cough, Ryan Kessler, cough, cough.
Who hasn't been good. He's not the same player he was earlier in Anaheim or in Vancouver, for that matter.
And still commanding $7 million on the cap for the next 3 or 4 years. So, womp womp. I can see more so where Anaheim is coming from. I think it's interesting that Bob Murray is the coach and the GM, so now he can see firsthand what's wrong with this team and what they need to do. I wonder whether this is an interesting time for, oh God, what's his name? Used to coach the Oilers, Dallas something or another. Dallas Eakins. I believe he coaches the San Diego Gulls.
Yep.
So I wonder whether this is his time to come back and coach in the NHL again with Anaheim. We'll see. We'll see what happens with Anaheim. They're certainly in a better position than Edmonton because they've recognized their shortcomings and their faults, and they don't necessarily have a Jesus-like player like Connor McDavid. But I think both are in a really precarious scenario.
The broadcasters were talking about this during the Hawks-Ducks game, that Bob Murray isn't really there to coach. He's there to see what the players can do and be in the room and see what works and what doesn't, and he lets the assistants basically coach the team, and he can give some input here and there, but according to the broadcasters, Bob Murray doesn't really coach. He kind of just has a front row seat to the whole experience, which is, I mean, that's kind of a dream situation for anyone involved, right? I feel like having a front row seat to the inner workings of a team is great. But apparently he doesn't really coach, which I very much understand considering he has no coaching experience prior to quote-unquote taking over the head coaching spot after firing Randy Carlyle. But going back to the Eastern Conference for a second here, the Pittsburgh Penguins, man, I don't understand Jim Rutherford here at all, right? You trade Tanner Pearson, who he wasn't a 50-goal scorer in Pittsburgh. Sure, you could talk about his faults or whatever. Trading Tanner Pearson for one of the worst defensemen in the entire league, who still has term on his contract, is one of the worst trades I have ever seen in a while. And there's a lot of bad trades to go around. You don't trade a semi-decent forward, right, for literally, I don't want to say the worst, but he's definitely in the conversation. I mean, this guy is a black hole. He is not good at being a defenseman in the National Hockey League, and yet you trade for him when you're down defenseman yourself and you need to plug holes. I would honestly rather you I would rather you sign someone on the street than you trade for Erik Branson. We've seen time and time again he is not capable of defending his own zone. He's not good at it. And yet, you trade for him, you alleviate Vancouver of that mess, which is, again, why I called them winners in this trade deadline. Now Pittsburgh, down defenseman, is there really no other market? Is there no one else? No one else that you could trade for? You multiply Jack Johnson by 2. This is now going to be, if they are a pairing, the worst pairing maybe in the history of the sport. Honestly, this could very well be the worst pairing ever in the National Hockey League. Jack Johnson's very bad at his job. So is Erik Branson. This is going to be hilarious for everyone that is not a Penguins fan. This is going to be rough.
Mark my words that the Penguins won't make the playoffs this year. Those injuries that they just got, as much as Letang and Dumoulin are day-to-day, that doesn't help them. Jack Johnson, Justin Schultz, Marcus Pettersson, Goodbranson, Juuso Riikola, a prospect, and Zach Trotman, an AHL-level defenseman at best in the last few years. They have nothing. They really don't have anything except for maybe Justin Schultz, but he's a better offensive defenseman than a true stay-at-home defenseman in any case. So they are really, really lacking. And now with Brian Rust, who's out long-term, losing a serviceable forward like Tanner Pearson, they just undid a lot of good work with one move. I would have thought a lot better about them if they still had Tanner Pearson, even if they still lost Rust and Letang and Dumoulin to injury. Their farm system seems to be just fine, but replacing him with an NHL-worthy, all-time awful defenseman, that's just tough. I seriously think that it's a nail in the coffin. And right now they currently sit in that second wildcard slot, with Columbus, Philadelphia, and Buffalo breathing down their necks. One of those teams, probably Columbus, is going to just keep going and keep going and keep going and bash Pittsburgh all the way back down into the standings out of the playoffs.
I don't want to disagree with you, and I think I will agree with you that unless this blue line somehow, some way becomes good, which, spoiler alert, it won't. There's a high likelihood, unless guys like Crosby and Gensel and Malkin and all of their stars can somehow just make the team win 9-8 every game, it's not going to happen. Because this team, right, looking at the defense right now as is on February 28th, 2019, this is, like you listed off, is not a good blue line, right? And it has gotten a lot worse with the acquisition of Eric and Brent. I can't get over this. This has to be one of the biggest self-imploding trades I've seen in recent history. There have been bad trades, right? There has been bad trades, there's been bad asset management, there's been bad this and that. This is just this is the biggest self-imploding deal I've seen in a long time. The Penguins are a point away from not making the playoffs, and what do? They get worse. They get worse. Their team is now worse because they traded Pearson and got one of the worst defensemen in the entire National Hockey League. How do you let that happen? Jim Rutherford is a better GM than this. This is not good. This is not good at all. And Pittsburgh fans haven't been very happy with the team all year. I mean, boo-hoo, right? You've won back-to-back cups. You have 3 cups in the last decade. There's a lot that you can be happy about. But if I was a Penguins fan, I'd be very, very aggravated, and I can't blame him. You signed Jack Johnson that hard contract. And then what does Jim Rutherford? Jim Rutherford understands he's getting a lot of hate for that Jack Johnson contract because he's not good. So what does he do? He multiplies Jack Johnson by 2. Incredible work by Jim Rutherford. And now with Pearson out of the lineup, the forward group isn't as good as it was. Obviously, Pearson isn't a 60 goal scorer, but he did add some meat to that lineup in the bottom 6 that perhaps isn't there anymore now. You have Nick Bukestad and Jared McCann, and you still have some form of offense on that bottom 6. Tanner Pearson, it was better than what it is now. You will not be able to convince me in hindsight or today or yesterday or whatever that this was a good trade for the Pittsburgh Penguins. I'm not saying you specifically, but anyone. You will not. I don't care if if the Penguins somehow make the final, right, and Goodbranson scores the game-winning goal to win the Cup for the Penguins again this season, you will still not be able to convince me that this was a good hockey trade for the Pittsburgh Penguins.
I will eat my words if that scenario happens, because that sounds like a bat out of hell. That sounds like the most ridiculously random occurrence to happen in the entirety of the NHL this season. But yeah, it's a backwards hockey move is what it is. And you're right, Jim Rutherford is a much better GM than that.
I'm still laughing at it, looking at it. It's such a bad, just awful move for the Pittsburgh Penguins now. Really quickly, let's go through the Winnipeg Jets lineup with Kevin Hayes. I mean, this top 6 is looking really, really, really solid. Line A, Scheifele, Blake Wheeler, top line. I mean, that's not going anywhere. That is the bread and butter of the Winnipeg Jets. Now you got Kyle Connor, Kevin Hayes, and Nikolai Ehlers. Now that is a disgusting top 6. And their bottom 6 isn't that bad either. They got Brandon Tanev, Adam Lowry, Brian Little, and Matthew Perreault, Andrew Kopp, and Jack Roslovic to round that bottom 6. That's not bad. That is a pretty solid bottom 6 tandem. And then you get to the blue line and you look at Nathan Beaulieu, kind of bolstering that blue line. But Beaulieu, I feel like, didn't get the playing time he probably should have had in Buffalo. You got players like Matt Hunwick playing over him, like Zach Bogosian playing over him. Bogosian, he's not been good for a while now. I feel like Beaulieu should have had a spot over them, but the Sabres thought differently, and they moved him to Winnipeg. Beaulieu's going to get a spot now in the Winnipeg lineup. You got Trouba, you got Tyler Myers, you got Ben Sherratt in there. Buffalo's still out for a little bit with injury. Connor Hellebuyck not playing the best hockey of his career, but still good enough to carry the team. Brossoit's playing pretty well as well. Kevin Hayes is looking very, very, very clean in that lineup. And of course, I'm sad on the inside because I love Kevin Hayes as a New York Ranger, but Brandon Lemieux looked like a young Sean Avery in the game against the Lightning. He was everywhere. He was picking fights. He was getting on everyone's skin. I mean, he was looking pretty good. The trade, we'll get over the trade here in New York, but Kevin Hayes is looking real nice in the Winnipeg lineup.
It's a win for both teams, I think. The Rangers clearing house. They did what Anaheim should have, and they cleared house as much as they possibly could, knowing that they need to gear up and do work free agency and work the draft well. And Winnipeg reaps the benefits that top six is very interchangeable, regardless of that it's set right now in daily faceoff as Laine, Scheifele, Wheeler, Connor, Hayes, Ehlers. They could all move around at any given point in that top six, and it's still just as lethal and just as potent a combination as any of them. The Nathan Beaulieu deal helps them a lot. With Buffalo still out, as someone put it to me through the SB Nation Slack chat, Winnipeg's basically been playing with half an AHL defensive lineup. So Beaulieu and Trouba help. When Dustin Buffalo comes back, that defense looks a lot better. And I think that'll all help Connor Hellebuyck, who must be taking shots up the wazoo with this type of a defense. I'll take a look right now. That must only help him once he gets that NHL caliber defense back, just to settle in, have reliable defenders in front of them, knowing that they're actually going to make defensive plays and not throw the shots that he's getting on top of him. I think that they're going to round into form and he'll do really well. Yeah, this season alone, he's already had to make 1,420 saves on 1,500 shots, which is insane.
Yeah, and you take a look at the standings right now, right? The Winnipeg Jets are 1 point behind the Predators for top spot in the Central Division. And this is with, like you said, half of their blue line being minor league players. So once Buffalo gets back, once Beaulieu settles in and becomes a solid depth defenseman for the Winnipeg Jets, Connor Hellebuyck's going to start playing well. And I mean, they're 3-6-1 in their last 10 games. I would expect that number is going to be a lot better than it is now.
Yeah, I think so. The Winnipeg Jets, again, Chel didn't take a day off. He knew that he had to improve his team somehow. And I think he did both in the now, in the near future, and in the far future with the little minor league moves that he made. I think he gave himself just enough depth for Winnipeg to continue to consider themselves contenders.
One last thing on the agenda here before I let you go, the Nashville Predators. Wayne Simmons now on board. They give up Ryan Hartman, a guy who, I can't believe this happened, but they traded a first-round pick to get him. They now gave him up at a fourth-round pick for Wayne Simmons. Winner or loser here, Nashville Predators, in your opinion, if you would have to give them a grade, what would you assess to Kevin Poyle and the Nashville Predators?
Win, but a cautious win. I like Ryan Hartman over Wayne Simmons, but I think Simmons is going to do a good job as a depth veteran forward with a really young core behind them, Colton Sissons and Mika Salamaki as fourth-line wingers. And Rocco Grimaldi on his own right wing. I think that helps them just solidify, get a little more playoff success and playoff experience, and a bigger body and someone who's going to screen goalies and play hard nose, which is the way the West seems to start to be trending now. I think Michael Granlund was a smart pickup for Dave Poyle and the Nashville Predators. A guy who has phenomenal hands, a great shot, good skating ability, provides such a boon over the value Ryan Hartman had on that second line. And Wayne Simmons and Kevin Fiala, I would consider a wash. Fiala maybe the better because he's younger and has a higher ceiling and has more potential. But I think that if this is what Dave Poyle thinks is going to make himself succeed, I think he did a decent job.
The one thing I wish Nashville would have done is acquire a bottom six defenseman. Because right now, according to dailyfaceoff.com, their bottom two defensemen are Matt Irwin and Yannick Weber. I would have liked to see David Poyle. I think I called him Kevin a little bit earlier. If I did, I apologize. David Poyle. I wish he would have acquired another number 5 or number 6 defenseman. It wouldn't have taken a lot of... the price wouldn't have been too high. I feel like the Predators needed another defenseman on the blue line. Some more help would have probably helped them more than hurt their assets in the long run. But you take a look at their offense, right? Philip Forsberg, Ryan Johansson, Victor Arvidsson. That's a great first line. Now you have Mikael Granlund, Kyle Turris, Kalle Järnkrok at the second line. That's also a solid line. Now that third line becomes Wayne Simmons, Brian Boyle, and Rocco Grimaldi. Grimaldi not super offensively talented, but now you have Wayne Simmons and Brian Boyle. Brian Boyle, of course, you just park him in front of the net, and the goalie can't see anything no matter what he does, because Brian Boyle is such a big guy. I think Wayne Simmons is going to add a pretty considerable amount to that team, if only on the power play, right? If nothing else, if everything else equals 0, Wayne Simmons, what is he known for? Scoring on the power play. Well, everyone would like to score more on the power play, right? No matter how many goals you score on the man advantage, you would always like to score more. And Wayne Simmons knows a thing or two about doing that in those particular situations. And this is going to be a complete mess, especially in the West. The East is shaping up, but there's still a lot of movement that could potentially happen. The Flyers have won 6 of the last 10 games. They're sort of still in the mix. They have 67 points. They are 7 behind the Pittsburgh Penguins right now for the last wild card spot. There's still a lot of movement that could be happening in the next couple of weeks or so. This is going to be a mess in the West. Complete, utter mess. The Blues, who have been a fairly quiet team after coming up to the deadline, if you remember, even around Christmas, even around early January, people were telling them, there's been rumblings of Tarasenko maybe being traded or Pietrangelo being traded and all that, and then the St. Louis Blues just come out and just start winning every game that they come across. I mean, they shut out Nashville in their last game. They play Carolina tomorrow. There's St. Louis out of nowhere seems to be in a firm playoff spot, but you take a look at Vegas at 71 points, right? And then you have Minnesota and Colorado at 68 points, rounding out the 2 wildcard spots. Then you have Dallas at 67, Arizona at 65, Chicago at 63, Vancouver at 63, and then the Oilers, Anaheim Ducks, and the Kings are bottom of the barrel. This is going to be a very exciting playoff race.
It's certainly the wild, wild west. And you know what? I will give St. Louis a lot of credit, but you also have to remember 11 wins in a row makes a gigantic difference in the scope of that team. If they go 6-5-0 or 5-5-1, that's an incredibly huge difference over winning 11 in a row. And that's what propelled them to win so many games and get themselves back up in a playoff standing. But you're right. Everybody is so close. There aren't too many teams in the West I would count out. Heck, even Vancouver. If Vancouver can make a big push, the only teams I'd consider out of it are Edmonton, Anaheim, and the Kings. That leaves so much play in that last wild card spot, all within 10 or 11 points of each other, for there to be 2 teams to come out on top and a lot of teams to feel like losers.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot a lot that can happen in the next 5-6 weeks or so. One last little thing here. The Sharks, I feel like, did very well by taking on Nyquist without giving up too much here. That adds a lot of offense to an already offensively potent forward group.
Yeah, I mean, we already knew that San Jose was a really good team, and they just continued to add to it. That Nyquist move again says we're going to go for it now. We've got a really good core of players. We've got enough depth otherwise to say, you know what, we can give up prospects and give up money and give up draft picks now in order to maximize our chances of winning. And Gus Nyquist surely needed to get the heck out of Detroit with the way they've been performing. I think they did a really good job. It's hard. Their fourth line doesn't look fantastic, but that top nine, Timo Meier, Kachur, Pavelski, Evander Kane, Tomas Hertl, Jonas Donskoy, Gus Nyquist as a third line left winger with Joe Thornton and Kevin LeBanc, I'd say that's pretty dang good. And then that defense, don't even get me started. Goaltending is still their issue. But you know what? With the offense in front of them, I think they can take it.
These next 5 to 6 weeks are going to be some of the most incredible must-watch hockey that I don't think the last 6 weeks have ever been this tight in both conferences. Of course, the West is a complete and utter just you breathe and you're either in or you're out of the playoffs. And it's shaping up to be similar to that in the Eastern Conference as well. This is going to be an incredible next few weeks of hockey. And I really, truly, truly appreciate you coming on, taking the time to talk to me for a little bit, Jake. Again, on short notice, I appreciate you coming on. The Stanley Cup of Chowder connection here. Tell people where they can follow you, where they can read your stuff.
Absolutely. Well, you can follow me on Twitter at Jake Reiser. The spelling is Reiser. That's probably the best place to find my posts, which you can find also on at Cup of Chowder. Those are probably the best few places to find me. If not, just Google. Google can be your best friend.
Again, really appreciate you coming on, Jake. I'll talk to you again real soon. Episode number 38 coming up next week. I'll talk to you then.